Well, welcome to Facility Files. My name is Elizabeth Ignatowicz, and our guest today to speak about facility financials is Ben Smith. And Ben, I'm going to let you do a quick introduction, your little spiel on who you are, your background, things like that, because I'm always, when I'm in the room with you, personally, I'm just like, let me listen. You are so much to bring to the table with your experience and your stories and anecdotes. I learn a ton anytime I'm around you. So I'm excited to share you with this podcast platform. And I will pass it over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much. You're very kind to say that. I don't know if you're paying me or if I'm paying you for this. So I'm Ben Smith. I am currently a facilities manager. I'm an in-house practitioner in a municipal organization. So I work in the public sector right now. I found out that I have been in some sort of facilities management work for about 13 years. The first 4 of which I did not know that I was doing this. So like most of us in facilities, we find out one day that that's what we're doing. I've been in my current position, current organization for a little over 7 years now. Prior to that, I was in private commercial real estate services, one of the big providers that we all know. And my client on that account was a utility. Prior to that, I was actually back in public service where I found out about facilities management. I was in higher education running a student union, which you wouldn't think, is strictly facilities management. But when you've got, 30 students and you've got events and conferences and food and beverage, business office, and then all the stuff of just like making the building run. It turns out that that's what I was doing.
You didn't choose facility management. It chose you is what it sounded like.
Absolutely. That is what happened. Because my actual vocation, which also, and I'll tell you in a minute, is not related to my education, is in audio engineering and event production. So I was a sound guy for a long time. That's what I learned in college. And then I went on to work for Paramount, did some work in broadcast radio. So I was both in front of and on the other side of the mic, running the soundboard there, making the commercials, making all the stuff that you hear go into radio broadcast, and was doing that for on about 13 years. And then to back up even further, my actual education is just in going to school. I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in liberal art, mainly because I got to my last year of undergrad and saw that my scholarship was going to run out, had bounced around 6 different majors because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was going to grow up. So what do I have the most of? Okay, I can make this an English degree and we'll do a minor in American studies. So, and then my master's degree came about because for a hot minute, I was a high school English teacher, was going to go get my master's degree in education, got into actual teaching right about the time that No Child Left Behind came out, decided that wasn't for me. And I was halfway through my master's, so I just switched that into general studies. So
That's funny.
Here we are, folks.
Yeah, so I've actually never shared my story here, but I went to college to be an educator as well. And I had a baby in college. And so I needed a job. I needed to work. And I found property management, started making more money right off the bat than I would have as a teacher. So I said, okay, we're leaving teaching, not going back to school. I'm not wasting my dollars, all of that. And started property management, then transitioned to facility management 5-ish years ago. And here I am. So I actually did the math the other day. I've been in the industry 10 years that as of January. And so, yeah, I didn't choose facilities. Facilities kind of chose me as well.
Yeah. Yep. Here we are. It's okay. If you're watching or listening to this and you did not know that this is what you were going to do when you grew up, that's okay. None of us did. And the great thing about this industry, I'll say this right off the top, is that you still don't have to decide.
Right.
You can do so many things.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yes.
So I'm just never going to grow up. That's fine.
I love it though. I never will either. A little story about today. We are very smart people with what we do, but there are moments where our common sense just goes out the door. I was doing some technology stuff, locked myself out of my work order management system, put in a ticket, it got denied. And I was just like, what? Why is this getting denied? apparently I selected the wrong region. So I'm going through all the regions and I'm like, which one could I be? I chose the one I thought I was. And I'm reading them out loud to a friend on the phone. I'm just like, hey, this one I know means this. This means this. This means this. I don't know what NA stands for. And she goes, North America. And I was like, I thought it meant not applicable. That's why I didn't choose that.
Yeah.
So had a moment today. We all had a
Yeah.
good laugh. Hopefully I will be back in my work order management system ASAP. We just have our moments, you know? There's my
We
funny
do.
today.
Oh goodness. Yeah.
Out to finances.
It's not surprising we have those moments sometimes with as much as a lot of us are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And, it just feels like some days you're bouncing from one fire to the next. And the fact that we can remember sometimes to eat lunch, um,
Yes.
how do I get back home? All that type of stuff.
It's just autopilot
It is
sometimes
a wonder. Yeah.
on those things. But yeah, she even mentioned, she said, we can only hold so much in our brains at one time. And I was like, thank you for making me feel better.
Yes. Agreed.
All right, finances. It's such a fun topic. But honestly, I'm a nerd, so I love numbers and finances. This is my nerdy excitement. But if you're hiring someone new to the industry or new to this role, let's talk about what they should know about their finances. And we can speak on a high level. We'll then break things down further. But Ben, when you're hiring someone, whether it's a facility coordinator, assistant facility manager, a facility manager, what do you need them to know about finances?
Oh goodness. I just for full transparency, I honestly and truly tend to hire people that do not have experience in the industry because I am very particular about how I want them to do certain things, whether that is work order management, whether it is procurement practices. And because of especially where I work right now in a municipal environment in the public sector, there are some different flavors of how a lot of that stuff works that is not necessarily advantageous for someone with prior experience to come into, because the private sector can be, while similar in some regards, very different. I hope at the very least that someone comes in and recognizes here's something that anyone with any awareness of facilities knows. So facilities management does not make money. We are a loss leader. And so we have to justify our existence and our operations by saving as much as we can within reason. We're not the ones going out there and selling, selling a service or a commodity or anything like that. So I look for someone to have a mindset of efficiency, of looking for places to just save, to trim, again within reason. We're not talking about taking an axe to the main trunk here, but finding these little wins in the budget or just in operations. Can we be doing something a little more efficiently? And that's why you'll notice in my intro spiel I said nothing about a financial background. I don't have one. Everything that I have learned about finance has come on the job in this industry. What people usually bring to facilities management is kind of that mindset of troubleshooting, of problem solving, of finding efficiencies. If you're someone who is interested in sustainability, you already kind of have that mentality of, we're going to save, we're going to reduce usage. And in doing so, the follow-on effect is reducing cost.
Right.
So it's kind of having that approach of doing things efficiently. Now we still want to provide all the services that we're expected to provide and in a very high level, but not with, extra overhead. We want to be very lean in what we do. So somebody brand new coming in, be receptive, be a sponge, be okay with just kind of like maybe what you're doing right now is just listen to me drone on for some amount of time about the intricacies and the ins and outs of how to deal with public finance. But as long as you're willing to kind of adopt that mentality as well, that's what I'm looking for in a new person. And so again, that's why I don't particularly look for people who have been in the industry before, because we'll say the JLLs of the world, the CBREs of the world, may do something different from, say, a private company that has in-house support versus a public sector company that has in-house support. Be flexible. Be a sponge. Don't expect here's something that from my current workplace, and anybody listening to this who knows where I work will understand this. Please do not come in with the expectation that in order to attend any meeting that you have to be fed. We spend so much money on food. It amazes me what our food budget is. We're all the time talking about saving money, and then we turn around and we cater in, hot lunches on an almost weekly basis. So
I do.
anyway,
I do have a
small
little
aside.
anecdote about that too. When I joined facilities, I was very fit. And we went out for alcohol and beer 2, 3 times a week because we were just running on trying to calm ourselves down. And about 3 months in, I was like, y'all, I've already gained 15 pounds. I gotta stop. I can't do this all the time. So I
Yeah.
blamed them. I was like, y'all are the reason. This is awful.
Mhm. The facility's 15 as
Yes.
opposed to the freshman 15. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I got you.
Back
So
back to
yeah, go ahead,
finance.
please.
Let's talk some lingo that they would need to know. We've spoken offline. I wish I could recall our conversation last week at breakfast. That was you were just rattling off things, and I was like, "Yeah, shh, let's talk about this later because this is so good."
So let's just start with the absolute basics. If you are coming into a facilities role, the first thing you're going to have to deal with is basic operations of a site, of a building, of a portfolio. It's the day-to-day making sure things work. And so what your first financial focus is going to be on is your operational money, your operational expenses, that budget, which is essentially your cash on hand. This is where you're completely liquid and you can say, hey, we've got a bill that came in for something that we asked to have done. We need to be able to pay that bill. So that builds into, depending on your organization's budget cycle, your financial cycle, how you're going to plan your budget. Most organizations work on an annual basis. And so you will eventually be asked to start weighing in on and perhaps fully developing your annual operating budget. And when they talk about the operating budget, that's what they're talking about. How much cash do you anticipate you're going to need to take care of the basic needs of your responsibilities?
How would you start building an operations budget? Are you looking at future plans? Is this where you would be doing this? Is this where you're looking back in the past? Let's explain how you would even set that up.
If you are one of the lucky few, or maybe lucky many, and I'm just one of the unlucky few where I'm at, when you walk in the door and you start this role, and perhaps your supervisor has asked you to start developing some planning, some forecasting for the upcoming budget request cycle, and your thought is, well, I kind of wonder how much we spend right now.
Yep.
You want to become very, very good friends with your accounting folks, your business office, your finance people, because more often than not, those are the people who are handling the processing of those invoices, of those bills that come in. And so, unless you already have a very robust software package that integrates your work management and your financial management, those people are going to be your best friends in this. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to them very, very nicely, perhaps with a sleeve of Girl Scout cookies, card to Dunkin' Donuts, whatever you decide, and say, hey, I've been asked to do this thing and I don't know what we spend now. I don't know what we've spent before I got here. What kind of historical data do we have on, say, how much we've paid janitorial companies for providing their service at this site? Wash, rinse, repeat. Landscaping, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, waste management. Actually, I have my cheat sheet over here. Fire and life safety, your security operation, food and beverage. Heaven help us. Um, you know, patch paint, pest control, all these services and all these elements that go into the basic operations of the building. What does our spend look like historically? What you can hope for, kind of at best, is like, hey, yeah, we've got this data back X number of years. Here it is. They may give it to you in a bucket, depending on how the organization pays for all that stuff. They may pay for it out of one line item in the budget, just saying, building operations, and that's it. And then you're going to have to dive into all the invoices and figure out, hey, how much of it was to this vendor, how much was to that vendor. If you're lucky, they have these services broken down into different cost centers or different object codes or just different lines on the budget where you can say, this is our janitorial line. full stop. And you can see exactly what it is. So go find that history, go find that data, bribe whoever you have to in whatever means possible. And then you can use that on a year by year basis and see, hey, do we have kind of a straight line trend where we're spending, I don't know, 3%, 5% more per year over the last 5 years? And if that's the case, then it's pretty easy to extrapolate what you're possibly going to need over the next 2, 3, 5 years. If you see a pattern where it's kind of up and down and up and down, then you just kind of take the average of the increase and the decrease and do your straight line, forecasting that way. This is all sort of best case scenario that you have the data. Man,
I was gonna say, now what did you do, Ben? Story. What did you
I did not have the data. And so I'm actually still to this day, because as I've been in my current organization for the time I have, my scope has continued to grow from, it was initially 1 site to 2 sites to 6 sites. It's about to be 7 sites in, as of this recording, 9 days. And then on top of that, we have some sort of handshake tangential support of another dozen or so sites in our portfolio. So the data was not there, even though it was there. And part of that fun is that right before I got here, we had changed our financial management software. And
Okay.
apparently the transition from one to another did not go well.
Awesome.
And so there was all this rebuilding of data, and people were so focused on just like getting payments out the door without a whole lot of scrutiny, that there was not a whole lot of really fine tuning each line of the budget to make it work. Long story short, and I know we're too late for that, I had no data. And so I had to start building it. Literally, what I did was then I went back to my finance folks, my accounting folks, my business office, and said, hey, I understand we don't have this information or it's not readily available. Here's what I would like to do. I'm going to take each of these services, drop them into their individual budget lines, and go ahead and set it up, because there was no setup. So it was kind of a blank canvas. I was very lucky to say, this is how I want to do it. Got them on board with it. Over the past, several years now, I've been building that data. And I can go back historically now and see, hey, we spent, this amount of money on janitorial 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. By the way, I can tell you it's gotten very expensive.
I was about to say, when you started taking over and building this budget, some crazy things happened in the world that has made costs go through the roof.
Absolutely.
Than if you had done this 5 years prior.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, semi-new to the industry, or even brand new to the industry, and you're, in an organization that's still kind of picking up the pieces from the pandemic, you're not alone. It caught everyone off guard. Prior to that, from the Great Recession of the late aughts up to 2019, right before COVID hit, the economy was very strong. Everything was in a straight line heading up, and you could do pretty accurate forecasting just based on prior year performance. And then we have a pandemic and everything goes wild, and then you've got the supply chain stuff and everything is on a roller coaster. And so it's like someone dropped a rock in the middle of a pond, and we're still just now getting past the really big ripples just to the little bitty ripples.
Yeah.
It's a difficult time, but even so, the earlier you start collecting the data, and then the longer you collect the data, you're still going to see overarching trends in how your spend is going, and it can absorb those shocks to the system. And you can go back and say, hey, we're getting the stock market's just crashing. We're about to have another pandemic. What happened last time? Well, now you can go back and see, hey, these were kind of the percentages that we saw change. So you can kind of, I know you really can't plan for the next, March of 2020, but if things start to go south, you can start letting your business office know, hey, this is what we saw last time. I'm going to start like spending a lot of money. Just don't be surprised when you start seeing some of this come in.
Yeah, because we all learned you got to stock up now. We thought toilet paper, beginning with, but in facilities we learned it was everything.
Uh-huh.
Oh, please. I know that you have your COVID versary that you celebrate every year. You brought that up and I was like, ew. Today. I was like, Ben, ew.
March 11th was the day that corporate communications sent out the email to get out, don't come back for a minute. So we've got that marked on our calendar every year just to pour one out and move it on.
We got ours on a Thursday. I don't remember which day it was. And then I know that the government started their shutdowns the following day. But we were
Mm,
told that Thursday, hey, plan to not come back.
yeah,
Okay, we'll be back in a few weeks. Haha, jokes
a
on a
few
lie.
months. I did, yeah, yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
was wild. I tell you, quick aside here. Please edit this out if you like to. And this is going to sound so terrible, so you may really want to edit this out. The height of the COVID years, so 2020, 2021, when people were not in the buildings. Oh, we got so much work done.
We did.
We got caught up. We were able to do stuff and tear things up and make noise and make a mess and just get stuff done.
It,
Prior to like the supply chain stuff coming because the warehouses were still full. But
yeah. It was the
you
best
know,
time to do all the major projects that you can't do when you're occupied.
yeah. You know what? The coffee maker never broke. We were never out of toilet paper.
The ice machine
Um,
was working just fine.
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back on track to fine.
Sorry. Here we
All
go.
right, so we've gotten operations out of the way. Now let's talk about capital planning. What does that mean, Ben?
Sure. So, where operating money is your cash on hand, it's what you've got your debit card. You go and just pay the bills as they come in. Capital is longer term expected expenses that are related to much bigger ticket items. So, back to kind of a building situation, you're paying cash for your power bill. Every month, you got to pay the power bill. And one of the biggest consumers of power in a commercial building is your HVAC system. If and when your chiller decides, you know what, I'm done, I'm retiring. Chillers, air handlers, boilers, roofs, depending on the size, door projects, anything that is a hard asset to the building or a major piece of a system is something that is typically going to be addressed with capital money. If you need to replace, say, your chiller, that money is going to, unless your operation is just completely cash based and you have all of this, this Scrooge McDuck pile of money sitting around, you're going to have to probably buy that on credit or on debt funded monies that, depending on your organization, they may issue bonds, they may just take out loans, or they may have some other investment vehicles that they use to provide the money required to do major projects. Different companies, different organizations have different thresholds for what divides operating and capital, expenditure requirements. Capital planning is a little bit more, and I say this again, not as a financial expert, a little more black magic, because your operating expenditures are over the long haul pretty steady. You can kind of account for what each of the services you need is. Now, part of those operating expenses typically going to be things like preventive maintenance on said HVAC system. You're going to have a vendor come in. They're going to provide the quarterly, filter changes and belt checks and lubrications and all this other good stuff. That's part of the operating of the building. Well, when that piece of equipment comes to its end of life and you have to pay for it, unless you have a nice big rainy day fund, unless you have just a big pile of cash sitting around, you're going to have to say, hey, we are guessing that this piece of equipment is going to fail or just come to the end of its expected life in, I don't know, 5 years. And so the timeline, the horizon for capital planning is much, much, much longer than operating. You're sometimes asked to look at 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 year capital spending plans, depending on the size and the scope of the project. If you know that you need to get a roof replacement, that's going to cost, $1.5 million, that's probably somewhere, again, depending on the scope of your organization, somewhere in the 2 to 5 year range. You're going to have to plan for it. If you're talking about, we're going to hire 500 people over the next 5 years, and we don't have enough seats to house these people. We need a new building. Well, then that's on your 10-year timeline, a much bigger chunk of cash, depending on if you're going to lease, if you're going to rent, if you're going to build, if you're going to buy, could be somewhere up in the middle 8 figures, depending on how far vertical you're going to go. Where capital planning comes in is a good handle on the condition of your facilities and the systems that run them. And that backs into one of my favorite things. In fact, I'm delinquent on, as of this week, is a facility condition assessment program.
Okay.
Bit of an aside here, but it does feed into how capital planning works. Prior to me establishing this where I'm at now, we had no way of knowing exactly what the expected lifespan on certain assets were, whether it's a whole building, whether it's a roof, whether it's, again, chiller, air handler, something like that. It was just kind of a guess. It was based on feel. How much money are we spending to repair this thing over what time frame? But there was no holistic, cohesive look in a snapshot of how things look compared to how they looked a year ago. So I actually stole this from NASA. They implemented a similar program because NASA has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of buildings across the country. And anytime you do a full-on comprehensive facility condition assessment, by the time that report comes out, it's usually 6 to 12 months after the inspections had been done. So it's already outdated.
Mm-hmm.
And if something on that report had come back as like critical failure imminent, well, you know what? By the time you get the report, the chances are that critical failure has already happened.
Right.
What I've done instead is I had some outside consultants come in the different trades, different building systems, come in and do a very, very quick and high level assessment of each thing that I was looking to get an assessment on: mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing, structural, roof, various architectural elements, civil, things like that. And I gave them a scale. I need, on a scale from 1 to 5, what condition you think this is in. 5 is pristine. Hey, this is great. It's brand new install. Nothing's wrong with it. All the way down to 1, where it's like less than 10% of life expectancy left. It's got to get fixed tomorrow. And if it was actually completely derelict and not working at all, it got a 0. And that gave me a very high level, but easily conveyed snapshot of each element of a building, of all my buildings and all their systems, of where they were and where we needed to focus our attention for capital investment. And so they did this big study. It took maybe 2 or 3 months, and because it was so high level that the reports came back pretty quickly within a couple of weeks. So what I did is I took that's my baseline, and then every year, right about on the year, so it is this month as we're recording this, I go through all the buildings and look back at a couple key records that we have and say, hey, how has this changed from last year? And in doing that, because I'm in all these sites, and if I was like a higher level, like a senior facility manager, facility director, wasn't able to see all this stuff on a regular basis, I would have my staff provide input on this. I can say, hey, last year we guessed it had 18 years left on its life. And I'll look back through the records and say, well, you know what? Nothing's really changed. We haven't had any problems with it. We've done preventive maintenance on it. We're just going to take a year off. 17 years left, and just keep going down the line. And so we do that again, very high level, very quick. It's maybe a week-long process to get those records updated for the year. On the 5th year, I will bring back those consultants and say, here's all the data we've collected for these last 5 years. Take this, go do that same thing you just did and see how accurate it is and see if anything major has changed. And so on every 5th year, we get a refreshed, more professional look at each of these systems to reset the baseline. That in turn, then, as I mentioned before, informs how you want to invest your capital money. Hey, boss, we've learned that this water heater is going to die.
Yeah.
You can see it is rusted. There are leaks. It's not putting out as hot of water as it used to. We need to replace this. Well, it's going to be $50,000. Okay. So when can we plan for that? It's not dying now, but it is leaking. That's the very, very long story of how to get to how you're informing your capital investment, how much you need. And that is going to vary from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
And because it is such a far forward looking process, your priorities can change. You could have a catastrophic failure that wasn't planned for, that now you have to redirect some of that planned money toward that new failure. Then you start to defer some of the planned stuff to later years because you've only been allotted X number of dollars.
Yeah. And that happens at every facility.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
We do lots of different reportings for our financials. What types of reportings do you think are critical for the shareholders about facilities? I know you're reporting on your actuals that you spend each month. You're reporting on accruals, which is money that you've spent but not paid out yet. So like, hey, just so you know, we've got this money, we've already planned for it, like, because it's already, the work's either being done, has been done, not invoiced, it's still there. You can break out different things that you've actually spent, like, oh, we've spent this much money on HVAC, this much money on landscaping, this much money on PMs versus reactive maintenance at these locations. What are some things that you report on? And is it monthly, quarterly, annually? Talk about some of those reports that you do.
Sure. At least where I am, our reporting is we do a monthly check. So this is on the operations side. We do a monthly check of, where we are in the year, what our spend has been relative to what we expected to have spent by this time of year. Do that on a monthly basis, and we kind of know that, we can absorb a couple more, expenses in certain months. So that kind of gets into, for those of you who might be looking at your FMP credential, your facility management professional from IFMA, one of the pieces of both the business and finance module and the project management module is cash flow. And if you're in an organization that brings in cash and kind of, puts it right back out the door, you're going to be working very, very closely with your sales and your revenue folks. When it comes to projects, and I know I've kind of immediately gotten off topic from operational stuff. When it comes to projects, one of the big things that upper management is always asking about is cash flow. When do you expect that money to go out the door?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have so many financial commitments spread across the year into different months that we collect revenue from the service or the product that we provide. Here's how much we expect to collect in that month. And it could be based on, depending on what you're providing, it could be, seasonality, it could be consumer habits, it could be, if you make Christmas trees, then for sure you're going to spend a lot of, get a lot of revenue in November, maybe December. Then you might get a little blip there right after Christmas when people are trying to hit the sales for cheap next year. But like for the other 9 months of the year, you're not going to have that much revenue coming in.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of plan your expenditures to coincide with the rate of revenue that comes in. So that's on the project side. But on the operations side, we're really kind of tracking, and this gets back into that getting the data. Just collect as much as you can. So right now we're coming up on the end of March. So for my organization, it is the end of our third quarter. By the end of this month, when I get that financial report, I want to see that I have spent about 75% of my anticipated budget, because I'm 75% through the year.
Right. Makes sense.
If I'm ahead of that, if I've only spent 70%, I can say, all right, that's cool. I'm going to kind of hold back a little bit, but I know that in a lot of places, when you're talking about operating money, your cash on hand at the end of your fiscal year, at the end of your budget season, sometimes that money goes away and you don't get to carry it over. It's like, all right, let me start making a wish list, or let me look at all these other things that need to get done. And if I actually have that amount of money left over, I can pivot pretty quickly and commit that money to this other project we hadn't really planned on doing, but if we've got a chance, we will. Conversely, if I'm at 80% spend right now, if I've spent more money than I expect, then I can go to my staff and say, hey folks, let's tighten up the Granger orders. Let's tighten up the consumables and the expenditures, and see if we can make some of our tools last a little bit longer. Let's see if we can just pump the brakes a little bit to get through the end of the year. So that, by and large, that's really the main reporting that I do. Because again, in facilities, we are dealing with real-time operations of a site or of a portfolio. And so the higher ups are going to say, hey, how are you? Do we need to plan to take money from somewhere else and give it to you?
Yeah.
Because it's real easy to kind of get inside your head and feel like you're on an island and everything you do is the most important. But you always kind of have to step back and say, well, you know what? There are a lot of other moving pieces that the people in upper management are having to deal with. They need to know the good and the bad. Don't just tell them good stuff. Tell them when things are bad. In fact, they appreciate when you tell them when things are going bad so that they can plan for it instead of it being sprung on them at the last minute. Suddenly you have to find, I don't know, $100,000 for expenses that you can't explain offhand.
And there are instances where they're going to come to you in that fourth quarter and say, sorry, we already spent your money. So you're done. You stop. It happens. And that's where we have to be fluid. And we also have to be keeping up with the financials to know, okay, I've hit my mark for the year. If there's going to be emergencies, you're going to have to take care of them. But now you really have to explain, okay, I know you told me no more, but this happened. This was the cost, in explaining that and keeping people up to date.
You don't have to know, you don't have to be a financial expert, but you do have to be able to justify
Yes.
your expenses. And again, back to the very, very top where we said we don't make money, we just save as much money as we can, and we spend as efficiently as we can. I think that's what has made me fairly successful in this industry, is that I was not a financial person. I come from a liberal arts background. I can, I can write words and I can make arguments and I can convince, maybe not even convince, but at least justify why I'm doing something, and then let the leadership of the organization make the call. And if they do, that's fine. That's on them. And, sometimes it's hard not to take it personally if they say no, because you make a good argument, but
and there's times where we just have to be really creative with our solutions. Sometimes that helps save money. It could change the project completely. And, on my LinkedIn tag, it says I have something about I'm a creative problem solver. And that's what a facility manager is. We are just creative problem solvers.
Yeah, if I may, that reminds me of, this is still something I still go back to the well on this one, because it's only within the last couple of years and the cost savings were so immense. We recently had an ADA audit, American with Disabilities Act audit, to see how our buildings perform, how they're laid out, how they're designed and operating for accessibility for people with disabilities. And one of the items on this massive list of deficiencies that we have was our primary elevator in one of our administration buildings. Now, this building had been constructed in 1973, prior to the adoption of ADA, let alone the 2010 guidelines for ADA, which are the most current at this time. The deficiency listed was, and you can go and look at the standard, the cab of the elevator has to be a certain width if your door is centered on the cab. I think it was something like 84 inches, maybe 80 inches, something like that. Anyway, the measurement across the cab was something like, let's say if the 80 inches was the requirement, it was 79 3/4 inches. Technically not compliant. That's cool. What can we do to mitigate this? Next to each deficiency in this massive spreadsheet, they always had recommended fix. The recommendation was to replace the elevator. The report came out just prior to COVID, and the estimated cost of replacing this elevator was only $250,000. And I could tell you, even then, that was an undershoot because of, again, the age of the building, the constraints of the elevator shaft, all this other stuff. So even then, you're looking at 300. And then when we finally got around to being able to address it, kind of post-COVID, you're looking easily at $500,000, maybe a little bit more. Never mind the massive disruption to the operations of the building. So fun thing about this elevator is that because it was a vintage 1970s design, it had faux wood paneling around the inside of the cab. And then it had your rails on top of that. Got in there one day. It was a quiet Friday afternoon. I had a crowbar in my hand. What could go wrong? Get in there, and I managed to pry back one of those panels and realize that the panel backing that actually was on the cab wall was itself 1/4 of an inch thick, times 2 on each side.
Or
There's a 1/2 inch clearance, which would get us to 80 1/4. Huh. Okay. So start to pull this thing off and realize the backing on it is not solid sheet metal. It's like vented and got holes and everything. It's, rough end sheet metal. It's like, oh, well, that's not going to look good. How can we make this look good and still, meet compliance? Ended up getting one of my vendors in there, and we ripped all that skin off, and then came back with a 1/8 inch thick, just piece of sheet metal, stainless steel, resistant to stains and smudges and all this other stuff. Literally glued it on there with just adhesive, like really, really strong adhesive. And then at the very tops, very bottoms, we riveted it in, and then put the bars back on, the railings, because those were above the minimum height. It didn't matter how far those stuck out. And so when we, reactivated the elevator, we are at a clearance of 80 1/8 inches. Had the ADA guy come in there, and he's like, okay, how much did this cost, by the way? $20,000. versus 300, 400, $500,000.
You win the cost save.
I'm still, I keep joking that I paid for my salary for a couple years off of that.
You
So,
did. You did. We can
yeah,
justify costs all day long now.
yeah, exactly.
That is great.
Ah,
So,
love that
what
one.
other financial lingo would you want a facility manager to know coming in? Make sure
Okay.
that they are aware of.
Sure. You may hear, so we talked about operating money. You'll hear that called operating expense or just expenses or cash. Where that ties into your budget, at least where I'm at, goes into what's called GL, general ledger operations and processes and workflows. And then we will also say like GL string, which is the very, very long line of numbers that determines exactly where in the budget that money falls. So I've got individual GL strings for first different buildings, and then they are broken down into the services that are provided at each of those buildings. You have PL for project ledger, and that is usually where your capital money is going to be spent. That ties in your project management platform. Some way, somehow, it is tied into the same platform that handles your operating money because at the end of the day, all the bills have to get paid. So you've got GLs, you've got PLs. Talked about capital. You may hear CIP, capital improvement plans.
A basic
Oh,
one on a work order, an NTE, not to exceed
yeah,
that you
not
sent
to
out.
exceed. That starts getting down the rabbit hole of procurement, which I had purposefully not really gotten into as we were talking here, because you could do an entire segment on just procurement practices.
Yes.
Um, but that does feed back into your budget and into your costing, because you, as the facilities professional and as the subject matter expert on all of these services that are being provided to the building, have to be able to scrutinize your procurement practices to make sure that they are legal, that they are efficient, and that you are actually getting good value for your money. Because
Mhm.
again, that is our reason for being, is value for the money. If you want to kind of marry the capital planning, and as I was talking about facility condition assessments, you want to get into life cycle costing, life cycle cost analysis. How much money is it going to cost to over the entire life of this thing? Go back and talk about a chiller. Chiller itself is, I don't know, $300,000, at least the one that we just replaced. How much is it going to cost to procure it? So all the soft costs of having people assigned to, developing the RFP, another acronym, request for proposal, to provide this chiller, handle the bidding, handle the solicitations. So that's all the front end stuff and all the planning. Then you've got the actual purchase and installation of this thing. So you've got not just the thing, but you've got all the connections, you've got the electrical, you've got the hydraulics, you've got all this other stuff. All right, now you've got this thing. Then you have to say, how much is this thing going to cost to operate until it dies and goes to the farm, whether that is 10, 20, 50 years down the road. And that entire bucket of numbers that you come up with is your entire life cycle cost of this thing. And so that's where you get into comparing options. Do you want, version A of this chiller that has, this capacity, it's from this vendor and it has these features, but it only has like a 10-year lifespan? Or do you want to do all this, all this other stuff from manufacturer B? It's going to get you more time, maybe 20 years, maybe it doesn't have as many features, or can't be programmed quite as easily. You have to take into account all of that, everything that goes into not just how much it's going to cost to operate the thing energy wise, but how much is it going to cost you in soft costs? How much time are you going to spend dealing with this thing?
And that is how we
Send,
justify getting all the cool shit.
Making the phone calls, sending the emails, harassing the vendors, like, get this thing done. That takes time.
Yeah.
That's time out of your day. And you can break that down to an hourly cost and say, hey, this is part of what it takes to run this machine.
Yeah.
If I'm spending 10 hours a week dealing with this installation piece, then oh my goodness, that's a quarter of my salary for that time frame that is going toward
Yeah.
this. Bosses, do you want to pay me to do that, or would you rather I do some other things and we call in a consultant to handle this?
Or even some of the
It,
smart building features that can do that for you now.
exactly.
Like, yes,
Yes.
they are a hefty cost up front, but what are the costs long term if you don't utilize those.
And one of my favorite arguments for getting something now instead of putting it off is a very simple principle called the time value of money. Money right now is worth more than money tomorrow. That is because of inflationary pressures. So a dollar today is not going to buy you as much as a dollar tomorrow.
True.
So when I get pushed back on saying, hey, we need this new, canopy system to cover our materials piles out in the shop yard, because the one we have right now is failing, and it is going to cost us, I don't know, $1.5 million right now. Well, we can't do it right now. We don't have the money on hand. If we wait 3 years, we'll have the money, but it's going to cost us $2 million at that point.
Yeah. Benefits. Yeah. Weighing out all the options.
So to wrap up, well, I love that in the prep notes that you gave me, the last line was, "This can be an incredibly boring subject, so let's keep it light and engaging."
You're welcome.
Yeah, I don't know if this is specific to finances and business practices, or if it's just something for facilities in general. We honestly and truly have a thankless job. You generally do not hear about anything unless it's a complaint. Something's wrong, something's broken. I think that's why we get along with IT folks very well. Hats off to the IT folks. You face a lot of the same pressures we do. And if someone walks by the office or your cubicle and you're sitting there playing around on your phone, or you're playing on Reddit or whatever, and a boss says, "Hey, what are you doing that for? Don't you have stuff to do?" Well, that's what you're paying me for, is to be here if something happens. Sometimes we got to take a break. Sometimes we got to unwind. We got to blow off some steam. So if you need to get your headspace right for a second, it's totally worth it. Find out what your boss needs, wants, expects from you. Where are they struggling to provide financial information, or even just get it themselves, that would help them do their jobs better? Again, this is more of a global thing, but I've been very upfront with my boss, and he's been very receptive to it since I started this. It's like my job. I have two primary jobs. One is the provision of services to our staff so that they can focus on the work that they've been hired to do and not have to worry about figuring out why my trash didn't get taken out, or how do I change a light bulb. It takes time away from them. It's an inefficient way to pay them to do work. And ultimately, it is a disservice to our customers. The second primary responsibility that I have is to keep my boss's phone from ringing. Now, while I cannot stop it completely, what I can do is arm him ahead of time with the information he needs to answer the questions he's going to get. Stuff that he does not know intimately about my job. Find out what that person needs. What is your biggest headache in my world that I can help you with? So if it is, hey, my boss is really giving me a hard time. We're running short on budget this year across the division, across the department. I need to know where you stand, and what your expected expenditures are going to be, and do you have any flexibility? Give them the news, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Be honest, be upfront with them. Tell them something that will keep them out of trouble. If your boss stays out of trouble, chances are you're going to stay out of trouble.
Right. And we can create a lot of trouble all on our own. We don't need added.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But yeah, if just for some general subject matter information, if you haven't already, I would say really anything that has anything to do with finance. It doesn't have to be corporate finance. It doesn't have to be specific to facilities and operations and things of that nature. But latch on to some websites or newsletters that are kind of pop sciencey a little bit, but that present financial information in an entertaining way. One of the earliest websites I got onto and don't really look at much anymore is called Motley Fool. It's money stuff, it's finance stuff, but it is written in sort of a lighthearted way and has a nice big glossary of terms that you can go to. If you're a little more focused again on your facilities education and your credentialing and are getting into, say, your FMP credential, that entire workbook on finance and business can be your Bible when it comes to anything dealing with financial operations in a facilities environment. So I'm actually looking at the workbook right now here on another screen, and the chapters are very hittily titled. Chapter 1, Finance and Business in the FM Organization. So that's basically accounting standards and records, double entry accounting. And I'll be honest, thinking back to when I took this, some of the content in here is very, very specific to like accounting.
Yeah.
If you're talking about double entry accounting, and that gets back to like your accruals versus your actuals and things of that nature, some of this stuff is for people who live and breathe this stuff. I love my accountants. I've dated accountants in the past. They are crazy, all of them to a T. But anyway, I love you all equally. It helps to know what they are dealing with, at least at a high level, because that way you can speak their language.
Yeah.
So you've got that. Then you've got financial management of the FM organization. So that's your types of budgets. That's really like large scale budget monitoring and closeout, things of that nature, financial statements, which again, this is really deep, business office type of stuff. We talked about capitalization versus expense. That's one thing that's in here, lease versus purchase. If you're going to get into the real estate side, pro forma statements. I mean, stuff that's a little much for like standard operating financial stuff, or facility stuff. That said, you've got fundamental cost concepts. So if you're like me and you may have taken intro to accounting back in college, and that was the one class that you blew off that semester, ended up with a very, very low F at the midterm and decided, ooh, I better do something. Somehow pulled out a B, and I don't know why, but I remember nothing about that course other than it's over. I don't have to do it anymore. Chargebacks, again, if you're getting into real estate, you have tenants in your space. And you as the owner are going to have to deal with that. Lots of financial reporting. They go through the entire procurement process. Procurement is a big piece of this. And then there's contracts, which we didn't get into, which again can be its own podcast, because that's where you get into your work scoping and your solicitations, how to vet vendors based on best value and cost. You're really going to need that when it comes to janitorial, the
Yes.
single biggest operating expense in any organization of a commercial variety. Also the one that generates the most complaints and requires the most hand-holding and soft cost admin overhead. So all that stuff's in there. The F&P is fun. It's great. And the nice thing about it, I hate to say it, it's a one and done. You do it, you get it, you're done. You don't have to think about it anymore.
Right. You have it. And you have those study materials to always go back and reference. I got the hard books. I paid the extra money for them to mail me the books. I also have it on my computer so I can do
Yeah.
a quick control F and find something. But it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. But that we are going to wrap up because we have gone way over talking about a lot of great stuff.
Shocker.
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 To wrap up, I just want to remind everyone, please subscribe to this podcast and rate it wherever you're listening. It does help us with rankings and visibility. If you find this valuable and you want to share it with someone else, please do. It, again, will help us. Any feedback, if you have any feedback, the email is hello@facilityfiles.com. If you want to get in contact with Ben, he is on LinkedIn as Ben Smith with all his credentials behind it. And I am Elizabeth Ignatowicz on LinkedIn. And with that, any last words, Ben?
Oh, go forth, be happy, take care of yourself. You're not alone. We are out here. If you have questions, concerns, if you just need to vent, find your nearest friendly neighborhood facilities professional. You won't have to explain anything. Just go for it, and we're there to help and support you.
Like last night, I walked into an event and literally just burst into tears, and everyone was like, "Yeah, I get it."
Yep, get it. Absolutely.
Have a wonderful day, and we will talk soon.